So there's this guy named Joseph. Joseph was a retired electrical engineer, a father, a grandfather, and to most, just another quiet man with a serious-looking face and a serious behavior in the neighborhood. However, behind all that serious look, no one suspected that inside his home, he had built a small house behind layers of concrete and steel. This little tiny home would become home to his 18-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, and her 7 children for the next 24 years. Now, Joseph was born in 1935 and he lives in Austria. He has 7 children, 3 boys and 4 girls, and one of them is Elizabeth. In August of 1984, his 18-year-old daughter Elizabeth vanished. Her mother, Rosemary, was devastated. Her father, Joseph, appeared calm. A few days later, a letter arrived. Elizabeth had written it, or so it seemed. She claimed to have joined a religious cult and begged her family not to search for her. Her mum, dad, the police, and everyone who had been looking for her were relieved to have at least got a response, and so the search stopped. With the letter as the only evidence, the case was closed. But Elizabeth hadn't run away. She had not written any letter. She was still in the house, locked beneath it. How? Well, years before this time, in August 1984, before Elizabeth vanished, Joseph had secretly built a cellar, an underground room used for storage. Officially, people built it as a shelter in case of a war. However, this cellar had no windows and only one key, hidden away in the possession of Joseph only. On the day Elizabeth disappeared, Joseph had asked her to help him install a door in the basement by the cellar. Once she stepped inside, he captured her and drugged her, handcuffed her, and sealed the door behind him. For the next couple of years, he would sex her and she would bear children, his grandchildren. For 24 years, Elizabeth lived underground with all this, cut off from the world she once knew. The cellar was now her home, cold and small, barely enough space to stand in some places. It was a horrible experience. There was a bathroom, a bed, a hot plate, and an old television that Joseph sometimes brought down for them to watch. There was no sunlight, no fresh air, just silence. Days bled into nights, and Elizabeth lost all sense of time. Joseph visited often. He brought food, sometimes books, and controlled everything in strict order. He made rules, and if the rules are broken, he punished whoever he feels is at fault. He reminded her she could never escape, and if she does, no one would believe her. The 7 kids were born between 1988 and 2002. All children were fathered by Joseph. When she gave birth to the first one, Joseph took the child upstairs and told his wife Rosemary, Elizabeth's mother, that Elizabeth had left the child at the door and ran away again. He did this for the first 3 children. The 3 kids were taken upstairs and adopted by Joseph and Rosemary, who was happy to hear from her daughter and believed Elizabeth would return home one day. These children's names are Lisa, Monica, and Alexander. They grew up thinking their mother was far away, long gone, and does not care about them. Social services checked in often to see the children's well-being. Doctors visited. No one questioned the story. The other children, Kirsten, Stefan, and Felix, remained underground. They had never seen the sun. They learned to read books from worn-out books as their mother taught them. They played with broken toys and lived by the flicker of a dim basement bulb. Their world was 4 walls and the voice of their mother. They were taught to be quiet. They were taught to fear footsteps. They never screamed. All of these happened, including when one of the Barbies fell ill shortly after birth. Joseph refused to seek help. The infant died in the cellar. Elizabeth was heartbroken as a mother. Joseph, their father and grandfather, disposed of the body in an incinerator. Her mother was devastated. However, life continued. Joseph maintained his routine, still being strict and firm, cold, but not enough to get anyone suspicious of him. He took vacations with his wife, attended church often, and ran small businesses. He was the man who helped neighbors fix their lights, who smiled when spoken to, and who helped when there was an issue in the neighborhood. But finally the day had come. After 24 long years, help came knocking on the door again. This time it was in April 2008. At 19 years old, Kirsten, Elizabeth's daughter, became severely sick. Years of poor nutrition and no sunlight had taken their toll. Elizabeth pleaded with Joseph to take her to a hospital. He refused. For days, she begged and pleaded. but he refused. Eventually, he relented, but under one condition. Elizabeth had to write another fake letter, this time saying Kirsten was her daughter and she left with strangers. At the hospital, doctors were confused. The girl had no records, no history. She was pale, underdeveloped, and frightened. Authorities began asking questions. Joseph, sensing pressure, finally brought Elizabeth upstairs to defend him. For the first time in 24 years, she was seeing sunlight. He told her to stick to the story, which she did. However, she was booked to follow the cops to the police station. At the police station, alone for the first time in decades, Elizabeth found her voice. She told them everything. The police was shocked and dumbfounded. They returned to the house with warrants. They searched the basement and found the hidden door. Behind it was a tight room, dark, damp, and silent. There were children's drawings on the walls, a worn-out mattress, and a half-empty plate of food. This was Elizabeth's prison finally exposed. Joseph was arrested immediately. Finally, the day has come. The homemade prison was finally exposed. However, Kirsten's illness deteriorated. For the next 7 weeks, she would be in coma. The news exploded across the world. Headlines called it the House of Horrors. People couldn't understand how this had happened for so long. How a man could imprison his own daughter, abuse her, and raise an underground family beneath his own roof. In 2009, Fritzl went to trial. He was charged with interbreeding, false imprisonment, coercion, negligent homicide, and slavery. He pleaded guilty. Courtroom sat in silence as the details unfolded. He was sentenced to life in a psychiatric prison. Elizabeth and her children were taken to a secure location, given therapy and new identities. It would take years, perhaps a lifetime, to heal. For the children born underground, everything was new. The feel of wind, the sound of birds, the sight of stars. The house where they were kept was eventually demolished. The cellar hole filled with concrete. No one wanted to see any trace of it to remain. This case changed how the world viewed missing persons, domestic abuse, and secrecy. It revealed how evil could hide behind locked doors and ordinary smiles. Elizabeth survived after everything. After 24 years, she raised her children. She confronted her fear and she spoke when it mattered. And in doing so, she reminded the world that even in the deepest darkness, courage still lives. Always keep hope alive. Rosemary, Elizabeth's mum, had raised the children as her own. She had accepted her husband's story, that Elizabeth had run off, and these abandoned children were hers. Elizabeth was upset that her mum did not look for her, which could have rescued her. Her mum claimed she never heard any sounds from the basement, never saw signs of a prison below, and never suspected her husband could do something like this. The world debated, was she truly ignorant or willfully blind? In truth, there was no evidence. Rosemary knew. She was never charged. Elizabeth and her children were relocated. She tried to build a new life with what was left of the years stolen from her. She remains silent to this day, never giving interviews. Her mother, Rosemary, quietly divorced Joseph and faded from public view, becoming estranged from Elizabeth and later reuniting with her daughter again. A reminder that sometimes the greatest monsters are those we love and trust.